Hello, my name is Arrow, and welcome back to Geek Out. So this week I wasn't exactly sure what to discuss, not because I was out of ideas or anything, but because I honestly had too many. I like to talk about relevant stories currently, using D23 from last week to talk about Star Wars, and then the week before that, the Frozen 2 trailer was hot news. However, two moves were made last week that involve some dearly beloved stories of mine, one being the release of My Hero Academia's Season 4 trailer. So originally I was going to dive into that anime, however, Disney had to go and do something that I just couldn't ignore. Now most of you don't know this yet, but I do have a very favorite animated show. And I have a lot of favorites, but there always has to be one at the top, and mine is a show that did not get the love it deserved, and for many unfortunate reasons wasn't given proper airtime. Most people don't even know about it, and that show is Tron Uprising. Now, I was going to wait and talk about Tron a lot later because there are so many deep dives I could do, it could literally be a mini-series. What you should know about Uprising is that it got canned prematurely, as many shows unfortunately do. There are culprit reasons as to why it got the axe, however, with Disney Plus around the corner and Disney XD YouTube randomly posting Uprising clips during D23 last week, well, if there's a slim chance of them putting that show in their roster or maybe bringing it back, then I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna talk about it. So, My Hero Academia is right around the corner, but I still have time for that one. With that in mind, I had to go with option 2. This week's episode I like to call Tron Uprising's Fearless Cinematography and Dynamic Mastery of Lighting, aka why you should definitely watch Tron Uprising. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm trying to contain my excitement here, but like this show, I might get a little off topic. I love this show. A little bit of a setup. This is the beginning of Tron Uprising. This is kind of an introduction to the character at this point. The main character is Beck, and he is fleeing from this assailant. That's basically the sequence that we're going to be looking at today to give you a little bit of backstory. That's all you really need to understand, other than Tron exists inside a video game. So all of these characters are programs within the video game. There are some differences in their world versus our world, which you'll notice as we go through this sequence. Using cinematography and the hidden language of film to be able to explain what these objects are, even though they are different from the ones that we have. The other thing to keep in mind is one of the biggest design challenges that they had to face when they were doing Tron Uprising is the fact that it is always nighttime in the world of Tron. It's always dark out. So because of that, lighting and color is very impactful in an otherwise black and dark environment. So this is Beck. He's our main character. He's our main protagonist here. The antagonists are always in orange. First off, we have this great diagonal happening here. We feel a little off balance already. He's driving his motorcycle or ATV, four-wheeler. So notice the camera zooms in to this bottom third of the camera. Then we go to Beck and his response to being followed by this orange assailant. Notice that he looks backwards and it goes along the line of his tires even to draw that visual cue. So not only is his pose and his face looking the correct direction, but so is the actual framing of the scene with the tires. I love what Tron does with their lighting here. Very few shows do this. You mostly see this in like more expensive movies. Creates this little rainbow. They're called lens flares. You don't get to see it a lot in animated shows, but Tron definitely uses them quite a bit. So notice that he is in the very lower part of the frame. Tron does this a lot where they'll put important things way along this edge or way along this edge, sort of to draw this contrast of scale and size. So then we flop to what is he going to do about it? So we get in close on his hands, his response to the assailant, which is to click this button, which glows. So we have a visual cue as well because this sequence goes by so quickly. Again, we have this rule of thirds as a really low third of the frame where the horizon is. We have this great sense of space between the clouds to the light source, which is the bike, and from the floor to the light source. Because of that, the eye is drawn into the center of the frame because of the gradients that's happening between the darkness up here and the light down here. We saw the light when he clicked the button, and now we get to see these are light trails. All the vehicles in Tron will have light trails. It's so that way you can battle another person, I guess, by controlling where they're going. So they're like little light walls. He starts in the center of the frame, and then as he turns the light on, he crouches lower, pulls himself tighter into the bike, and the bike starts pulling farther out of the frame, like he's going even quicker. So now we have this great low diagonal again. And because the vehicle that he's riding, the ATV, glows as well, we easily find it in the frame that's otherwise very dark because of the light. And then we have this great silhouette that happens of an over-the-shoulder, but a really low over-the-shoulder shot of the assailant. We're low to the ground, we feel the impact. A lot of times when you watch some sort of car chase, they'll do that with the camera in film a lot, really low to the ground behind the tires of the racing cars. So similar sort of idea that's happening here, except for we have this great use of a diagonal. So in a matter of seconds, the lights come out of the ATV. But this guy is prepared for it. The assailant moves and cuts into our frame, and we go all the way behind his tires, and that light shoots right past the camera. I mean, this thing is almost hitting us. It's so close. We are so tight in on the action, which really helps build that sense of excitement. And we get a little bit of smoke even, and those wheels cut right in front of the camera. So now the assailant is on the left and Beck is on the right. We get to see that he's catching up quickly. And again, we have that top third is really high in the frame. They love using this space. Tron Uprising has a very unique style. It's definitely something you kind of have to get used to. It has a style of storytelling, it has a style of the 3D models themselves, it has its own style of lighting, and the more you watch it, for me personally, the more I just grew to love it and love it. And we cut back to Beck, and he is bracing himself for something. We get to see his facial response, right, to what's coming up. So we're right behind his wheels because color, right, and lighting, the white blue lighting is Beck and the orange lighting is the assailant, following with his wheels, and we see this some sort of jump that's happening, right? It grows in size as the camera is locked to this wheel. We're approaching this jump. We don't even see the character yet. We just see that light grow in the frame right here. So we know this is where Beck's coming from. Also notice that we should recognize this peak that we were slowly getting closer and closer to in the previous frame. Up he comes over the ridge. We again get that beautiful lens flare happening from the light. The camera looks up at him as he flies over the ridge. Now we shoot back to the assailant. Framing wise, cinematography, he is in the lower third. We have the orange of him versus the blue of the good guy, and they take up about the same size of frame. We see this same landmark with this triangle jump mountain that's coming up. And notice we are still fairly low to the ground. With this thing coming so high up, we feel the tension of this wall because the camera is nice and low. We shoot to a side view so we can see him duck real low and speed up. How do we know he's speeding up? Because he's moving forward in the camera. Have the characters lean into it and have the camera run the same pacing. So this camera, let's say, is going 50 miles an hour. And have it continue to go 50 miles an hour. And as the character is responding to a speed up by leaning into it, have the actual object move slowly forward in the frame. Then, because of that, if the camera is moving at 50 miles an hour, we get this subconscious feeling that he is going probably 60 because he is going faster than we are. He moves forward into the frame, goes up that jump, so we get to see him on the other side of this wall go up and over the lines, right? So we get this nice wide shot of the assailant creating this diagonal space over the lines. This is all in slow motion, builds tension, gives that real sense of airtime by slowing down. And then we swap to another camera, but notice that he's still in the exact same place in the frame and it's still slow-mo. We still get these great tracks. We're sitting below them, right? If the camera was above them, we might lose track of where we are. But because the camera is below them, they're still in the frame, still in the same relative spot that they were previously. And he is in the same spot as well, just facing the opposite direction, that he is still traveling this way. Even though we flopped cameras, we still feel the direction that he's heading in because of the direction of the bike. So slow-mo, he goes over the lines. Notice the camera is moving with him. The way they frame this is nice and tight in on this line, and we get to see from this angle, right, how close it is. So he lands. I love the smoke and the effects of the broken pieces of the ground. Because the camera is moving at 50 miles an hour, we know that he's slowed down because he's now smaller in the frame and we're losing him. But he'll speed up to catch us again. And he catches up and passes the camera. They are not afraid of letting that light interact with the camera, which I love it. So fearless. That light just overtakes the camera. So we have the stark orange on the left and the blue on the right. Notice the camera is the exact same as it was previously. He was just on the other side of those walls. We're still continuing that same camera. All right. So now he turns on his glow as he goes from the center of the frame out to the right of the frame. We see the light before we even see Beck, and we get a diagonal. And then the orange bike. How far is that bike behind? This far behind. We get a great sense of depth because of the timing that happens between when Beck passes us and the timing where the orange vehicle passes us. So they're using that sense of timing as well as space. Our brains know subconsciously that the closer an object is to the screen or to the camera, the larger it is. And the farther the object is from the screen or the camera, the smaller it is. So because of that, how small they got so quickly helps us realize how fast they're going and the distance between the two riders. The assailant is catching up to Beck, and we know that because of the time that it took for him to get to the location that he's at. I love this little bit of texture that warps in these light lines. They aren't just solid lines. They do move ever so slightly. You get to see the bend in light. You see that? To the ground in front of Beck's back tire. We are so tight in this race. So I love how the lighting reflects off parts of the ground. It really gives this ground a nice texture instead of just feeling flat, which sometimes 3D can feel really flat because the textures are all the same. Because we get these spots of reflectivity and spots of not being reflective, it really helps add that sense of like world building to it. So the world doesn't feel so flat. It feels alive. And then we see the orange start to creep up, and there's his shadow over Beck's shoulder with that orange glow, right? That color leading him. And now he cuts quickly in front of Beck with these great lines too because of Beck's outfit, pointing which direction he's going, right? We can see the assailant on this side of Beck, and we can trace that line all the way around him. So even though we're behind Beck's head, we can still see everything that's important. And we get this great diagonal that points exactly to the important part of the frame. And Beck recoils. We still see that orange on this side of the frame, which is super important, so that way we know he can't get around it. We're sitting right behind him. We're basically his passenger. That's how they amp up the excitement for this scene. And here we go. I love this effect of lighting. Lights hitting the camera with the blooms. And then the impact has that light impact that kind of happens, that distortion that happens when you look through water. See this? Because these are straight lines, but it's waving here. It gives this great sort of bow. So we know contact has been made right here because of that bow. And then bam! So there's a thing called chromatic aberration, is when you see the colors actually split into like yellow, red, blue, and green. They have that happen to showcase what a massive hit this is. I love how we get lens flares and lighting and this huge explosion of a sphere. This is such a huge explosion that it's distorting our view as the camera of the character. I love this circle effect too, with all of these little tiny squares inside of this giant sphere. It's a visual thing that I guess the camera is picking up on that they're creating here. And we get to see these sparks fly as he gets thrown into the air. And then the next frame is him being this close to us. Notice that fade that happens? With Tron Uprising, they don't have time to show you everything. This show moves. Every second matters. There is no time for filler. Everything has to be important. We've got to move through this story. And so because of that, we see Beck flying through the air and then impacting. Those are the two most important parts, right? Everything in Tron World explodes into little cubes because, again, this is a world inside a computer. So because of that, we see this explosion of cubes, right? And it's all all slow-mo. This whole section is slow-mo. And he rolls right into frame. Huge explosion over here, orange wall, and his excellent posing creates this strong silhouette. And that's balanced by this side of the frame being all of these little tiny pieces and this solid mass. Because he's in a low place at this point, so we are in a low place too. We're right down there on the ground with him. And he looks up, and this is where the lighting just really takes off and really should showcase to you why you should watch this show. Look at this. Bam! We literally get to see their face, his eyes go wide, and we get this bloom coming across the screen and this gradient of color. Man, that's such a beautiful gradient. And he blinks and looks up into the light. I love this. This could be a painting right here. This is such a great composition. We have the bloom of the light from the bike. We have our assailant, and then we are right there on the ground with Beck. We see what he is seeing. We have this great blue over here, which is fighting and contrasting this bright toxic orange. Everything feels very left versus right of the frame. By the colors, by the gradient, by the light versus the shadow that's happening here. Absolutely breathtaking. Notice that this side of the frame is basically empty, where this side of the frame is full, and this side of the frame is full, where this side of the frame is basically empty. They are balancing each other perfectly. Continuing on, that was my geek out. So as he moves forward, notice that his leg comes in front of the light bloom. You know, that's like science stuff. All right, so Beck, responding to that, recoils and puts his hand over his face. I love this bloom of light that's coming in front of him, the color of the orange. This is such a close shot. Look how huge his hand is in this frame. It takes up a third of the frame, it's just his arm. But that's how close we are. We're in the depths with him. We're on the ground too. Really puts us in the action. And now we shoot to the assailant, again with that beautiful gradient that's happening with the colors. Notice also that we're looking over, this is Beck's back right here. Notice that this is not in focus. He is in focus, so it definitely is telling us where to look. Beck, as a response, spins his arm over his back. Because if you have the camera close, that does become one of the problems, is that you're so close that sometimes you can't portray movements very well. He doesn't cover over the entire camera when his hand moves in front of his face. It just creates a silhouette over his face, and it only lasts a couple of frames. And then the camera cuts back. They have this nice window for his hand to come into the frame to grab his light disc. So in the world of Tron, if you're new to Tron, all of the programs have discs on their back, and those discs can be used as swords, which is really cool. So that's basically what he's doing, is he's arming himself. So his hand cuts in to the frame. Notice that this is the same camera that we previously saw, which is nice. Sometimes it's good to cut back to the same camera because that's more of a film thing than an animation thing. Is obviously in film you have real physical cameras. So if you have a couple cameras on set, you're gonna swap back and forth between them. Animation has this habit of constantly cutting to a completely different camera because they're all digital, but it's nice that Tron Uprising pays back to its film roots by cutting back to previous cameras, even though it doesn't have to. Like I said, we have this nice window here for him to be able to grab the disc off of his back, and it lights up when he grabs it. So again, they're using light to communicate what's happening in an otherwise confusing world. We don't have light disc strapped to our back, and we see the assailant moves as Beck moves into the frame to attack. The camera shifts. Again, we have this beautiful light gradient happening here, and we have this great clean posing, and we're gonna watch him throw something. Notice that he is in the third of the frame, and what he's throwing is in the center of the frame. In order to clue us in as to what we're looking at here, they have added this countdown timer to the bomb, because countdown timers go with bombs, right? That's a pretty logical jump for us to make. Also notice that the horizon line points in to the object, and then we have another beautiful frame here. We have the assailant, who has very calm power in this scene, right? We haven't seen him act as erratic as Beck has, so he has this great strong pose that is up higher in the frame than Beck, who is down lower in the frame. We have the object that is black against this nice soft gray toned gradient background, so it's easy for us to see. This great strength pose that's happening here. He's in this third of the frame where Beck is in this third of the frame, so they counterbalance each other. We have the colors that are counterbalancing each other still, and we have this great aggressive pose from Beck. I I love the visual comparison between these two characters, and they are exact opposite of each other. It really sells the mental space of the two characters, especially since he is higher in the frame as he is lower in the frame. Clearly the sense of power is going towards the assailant. So this part goes in slow-mo, which is really cool too. And the second it connects to him, it immediately goes back to normal time. We get to see Beck hit the ground and his facial response to being electrocuted. We get the electrocution that is still orange, and then we still get to see the assailant. They fit so many story elements into one scene. The very end of the scene, which I absolutely love, is they create a very good visual parallel to what Beck is feeling for the audience. So what happens is the disc rolls out that he had in his hand, obviously he dropped it, and it spins out of his hand. This disc spins and settles in the center of the frame, and it goes black. I love the fact that this is such an extreme diagonal angle. Has such a perfect parallel to Beck being in trouble, as out of control as the disc is leaving him and rolling and settling in on its own. That's the end of the sequence. What will happen to Beck next? You might be asking yourself. Well, maybe you should check out Tron Uprising. Cough cough, link in the description below. So thank you guys so much for joining me as I geeked out about Tron Uprising. Hopefully you could see some of the fearless cinematography and dynamic mastery of lighting in this scene. I feel like Tron has a really great way of putting the camera in places that most people wouldn't. They aren't afraid to break the rules sometimes for the sake of story. They have a great idea in their head of what feeling they want to impart to the audience, and they use the camera very fearlessly in order to tell that. They also use their dynamic mastery of lighting to create a mood. Tron Uprising has its own style. You can definitely see that and feel that in this sequence. So if there are some shows that you think have some pretty fearless cinematography or a dynamic mastery of lighting, comment them down below. I'm always looking for more things to check out and to be able to geek out about. So I'll trade you. You leave one down below and you can check out Tron Uprising. Sound good? Sounds great. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining me this week. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys on the flip side.